Okay, hi, I'm Laura. I was in this group. Yeah, I think, I'm not sure whether everyone talked about the same questions. More or less, okay. So on the first question, whether AI is good or bad, uh, a lot of like the initial reflex was to say it depends on the applications and sort of who uses an AI system and for what purpose. There was someone said it's obviously both, sort of goes into the same vein. It's like depends a lot. It does seem pretty powerful, very like quickly advancing, and not a lot about how it sort of amplifies current problems or challenges in society. There's also a point about this phenomenon of misalignment, mainly meaning that it's hard to predict what an AI system does before it actually does the thing, and that makes it hard to know whether an AI system is aligned with the values implicitly have or think it's like sort of straightforward. On the second question, we talked about a worst case scenario. It was a bit hard to tell, whether that worst case scenario is like the worst case scenario imaginable or the worst case scenario that is like realistically possible, or whether it's the thing that will actually happen. The amplification of biases through pattern recognition came up again. There's also an interesting point about sort of polarization. Sort of if you get your information from an AI system that's potentially, as with social media feeds, sort of made to serve your preferences, you might become increasingly convinced by your own opinion, and this could potentially lead to sort of political conflicts, worsening. Similar veins, misinformation that could potentially lead to increasing autocracy, or be helpful for autocracies, and then also the surveillance aspect that could lead to a more stable autocratic regime that might be currently possible. Another worst case scenario was sort of just we all die. I mean, this could happen, an autonomous AI or a missile AI or an AI getting misused, help me build a biological weapon. That could probably, be very bad. Included in this category, I think, is also sort of, we don't all die, but we get a lot worse really quickly, and it is like really hard to recover from that. And then, economic inequality as a result from like, profit from AI becoming very, accessible for a very small group of people and not accessible at all for the rest of us. And then the bright side, it's just very convenient and replaces things we don't necessarily want to do. That doesn't necessarily mean it will take our jobs, but it just makes our jobs easier. Then could really advance scientific research in like various fields. And if we think that scientific research is like one of the things that makes our civilization go as well as possible, then that's a big deal. Makes agency and sort of doing things by yourself, building a business, starting a new career or something, a lot more approachable because you have this like artificial guide or help that's just there. Also potentially very low certainty that it could improve governments to some degree because it could make them more efficient and better at their jobs. Potentially good. And then there were sort of a few other questions. One was a good point about sort of hype versus distraction from current challenges. So there is like the real possibility that we get really excited about AI or really scared of AI, and then we lose all sight of the things that already exist, like the challenges and the opportunities that already exists, and that there needs to be some balance, even if like that height might be justified. Yeah, there's also a way in which AI could theoretically close social and economic gaps. It certainly does make information a lot more accessible for a lot more people. Yeah, some depends on what we do with it again. And then the last question was sort of on reliability. So do we think that 1 in a million, no, like 99.9999% reliable AI will ever exist? So yeah, the first few takes on this were very much focused on the fact that there are things in the world, and then there are decisions we make based on those things. But we also usually take into account stuff like morality or ethical codes, which are very much not, visible or sort of inherent in the data we collect. So because it's hard for an AI to infer these moral codes we sort of made up, it is probably hard for it to apply these factors.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Okay, thank you, everyone. You can see if you stand here, then maybe they can see you a bit better. But yeah, can we have Richard's group? Yeah, exactly.
Good luck reading my handwriting. Well, if I can get it to stick on.
Not really that, but
Yeah, I'll probably break my hand through it.
Here's the trick. I should be at ease. You see, so here's the problem. There was an assumption made about the orientation of the paper, and there was an assumption made about the strength of the desk. Assumptions are very bad things.
Well, at least we got off to a good start. Exactly answer the same questions in the previous group. But we did start off with question one being, in general, is AI good or bad? And the consensus amongst the group was that you can't, first of all, that you can't really ask that question. AI in itself is a tool. It depends on how it's used. It depends on the context. We all know that there's great potential for good and there's great potential for bad. So you need to, it's more on us whether it's good or bad or not, the intentions, but also how much thought we put in. It's not sometimes something with good intent can end up being bad if it's not thought through. So there's also giving it due diligence and thinking properly before we act with it. And then so we moved on next as we meant security started to come up, so we moved on quite quickly to the second question on will it be good or bad for global security? And in general, the agreement was bad. We felt most potential, was the most potential, and that there was a potential destabilizing effect in terms of not really fully understanding the potential of it, unknown implications going forwards, but also the fact that the current kind of geopolitical context, the kind of multipolar global order at the moment, rising tensions that states may act before they really think it through. Timing of legislation would be really important. So if we started to make these technologies and implement them on a large scale before we properly got legislation, then that would be very damaging. And we felt like it was going to, probably lean in that direction the way things currently are. The other thing as well is we had a bit of conversation at the end about, well, what really is peace? Like what do we mean by peace? Different countries, different places will have a different conception of peace, and even peace even through time, the kind of meaning has changed. Do we just mean that people aren't shooting at each other, or do we mean something much deeper, something more about coexistence? So, and we didn't really come to I wouldn't say we came to a conclusion, because the word peace has been thrown around a lot and used so broadly that yeah, the only thing I would say, because we didn't end up defining it, is that maybe we need another new term, maybe if it's unclear what the word peace means to people. So then moved on to we had a task where we were tasked to think about either from like the position of say like a corporation or a state or like an individual, put ourselves in a position of thinking about what would AI mean to us, what would our interests be in it. When we started talking about say OpenAI, would it be, for example, motivated purely by economics? But our understanding as a group is that it was groups like Microsoft have a huge stake in it, but supposedly it's been built not really specifically for profit, but to kind of open up this new line of research in these areas. And obviously we were talking about the financial implications of the desire to attract capital. And we also had a discussion about particularly to kind of normative impacts, thinking about say privacy, because the issue with a lot of these AI systems like that is that they live off data, they rely on data. The more data they can get, the better. But if we have zero privacy and give it all of our data, it blurs these ethical lines of privacy, human rights. But the people that say Otter AI might argue that if we don't have all of this data, we're limiting ourselves. You may think that we don't need this bit of data, but actually, if we do this study, the AI could show us that maybe it is, just potential arguments. So there could be like a normative argument as well in their interest about trying to shift the way we think about privacy and laws about privacy. But we then started to think about governments, and straight away we were saying, well, not only would different governments have different opinions, we'd say a government like China, which already uses, say, facial recognition technology, would think about it potentially differently than say a Western state. But particularly in a Western state, we were also thinking about differences in departments. The health department is going to think about it differently to the defense department. But another problem that we have as well is that in this country in particular, a lot of power and emphasis is on heads of, ministers for departments, for example, but ministers of departments are almost never an expert in the department that they run. And as we discussed, I think it is about, on average, a minister tends to stay in the same post for about 18 months. So how can they truly be an expert? So how can they be fully informed? So it causes a lot of, I guess, confusion across the board, and our government's truly aligned into the way they're thinking about AI. So we kind of ended up realizing how complicated this type of thinking was. And then we finished on 2 questions. The same question, but with 2 different technologies. If a technology, the first one was autonomous weapons, if it was in a sci-fi film, would it be used by the good or the bad guys? So we mostly agreed it would probably be used by the bad guys, and that in general, these types of films tend to like before, looking at the underdog, like in Star Wars, the rebels, and fighting against this kind of insurmountable force. I didn't think today would go that way, but it was like an interesting thought in terms of the way that we think about the way we frame these films, where it's the underdog fighting against big oppressive power, often a fascist power using technology in that way, in a very, I guess, like anti-freedom kind of way. And then the lesser armed, lesser kind of capable technologically kind of rebels who have less resources would be using alternative methods or using their wits, guerrilla tactics to kind of beat this. And this is generally how these stories go. So these advanced autonomous weapons would probably be on for the bad guys. And then we asked about facial recognition as well, and we initially, some of the group straight away said it used, for a bad thing, it would probably be a bad thing in a similar way, being used in a repressive way. But we did have the point that it's already used in China, for example, and that some people, and that some would make the argument that it's brought more safety, that it's allowed, that basically it's dropped crime rates, whether it's I can't remember if we talked about whether it was like the deterrent aspect or whether it was catching criminals, but there's an argument to be made that it could be used to make society safer. So that is one that's already kind of a bit real. But that one has also been used in media already, and it's been portrayed as bad in media as well. So, but yeah, for similar reasons, we thought that would generally be seen as a bad thing. But we basically finished off by discussing how like media has a big impact on the way that we think about these kinds of topics. And I think it's not exactly a scientific way to go about it and to think about it, but that it probably has more of an impact than anything else on our consciousness of these issues. So that was definitely something to think about as we finished. on the power of media, but also the fact that a lot of us don't really have much expertise in these topics beyond that. So I think that covers everything. And yes, and just yeah, thanks to my group.
Thank you. Who's the rapporteur? Is that Anita? Thanks.
I went for a mind map format and I'm realizing it's going to be a little bit tricky to remember anything that was said. I don't know how to work.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Do you have one?
Yeah, sure. I'll do this.
Oh,
I'm going to go real high tech.
like that? Roger, thank you so much. Okay, cool. So
Yeah,
thanks for that. Sorry.
Yeah.
So
So if you stand on this side and then you can speak to, yeah.
amazing. We did 2 questions. I think just to preface, I think based on like the group, a lot of us like work across like nuclear issues specifically. So I think there was a bit of a bias in our thinking in terms of how we like define peace and security and that kind of thing. The first question was, are you more optimistic or pessimistic about AI peace and security? And for us, like fluctuation, like a bit of both, we need a lot of pessimism. In terms of the positive thinking, we were thinking firstly, there's something to be said about the life cycle of like how warfare develops, right? And AI and emerging tech could be the next shiny new thing that phases nuclear weapons out, and it makes it less of a strategic interest and less of a kind of like benefit for states, both strategically and symbolically. So that could and we also said that we know that there's existing use of AI safeguarding mechanisms with the treaty mediation and the Energy Agency. We also could potentially envision it like enhancing existing like risk reduction measures within like the nuclear, especially like looking at like crisis identification, like that kind of thing. And we about how we've seen so far, states seem to be relatively proactive. We've seen fiscal declaration states together, like unilaterally and bilaterally, the UN laws got passed. So like the wheels are turning, and that seems to be better than it has been historically for other countries in the past. And we also said that there's an increasing normalization of the humanitarian approach of like thinking of human security as centering impact on people and the environment, potentially the fact that mentioned when I'm thinking of people security like spaces, maybe we think that AI in a different way and things, and that can strengthen the way we do that. But we ultimately really freaked out about it. And so we had a big one about basically like this goes beyond the state. We have private industry involved, we have like non-state actors like terrorist groups, that kind of thing. And we were like, how do we regulate them? Private industry, like for example, they can self-regulate. That's what that means, like having consistency. We also said that we do have existing frameworks like national bodies, treaties, that kind of thing, for tackling specific kinds of warfare, like biological weapons convention, the chemical weapons convention, the NPT, all these things. At times they're weak, or like they've not necessarily covered the AI basis yet. We don't have too much frameworks. Seem to be a bit we also had uncertainty and a bit of anxiety around norms, standards, like state behaviors, international law seems to be crumbling a little bit. And so we kind of said, how can we trust and rely on states to participate responsibly in terms of AI risks? How do we stigmatize AI? Also in terms of thinking about like the global order and like the international system who's favored in that. If there are states who are traditionally like characterized growth or United States, they've been disfavored historically, like what with this kind of technology, this maybe they go, well, the international system doesn't find that data. The big dogs don't pay like the rules, so why should we? But we said, it disrupts the status quo. And in terms of thinking about peace and security in the kind of like broader level, there are dual use, peaceful use interests that can actually be really beneficial for people and the environment on the day-to-day systems. That's kind of like the big one. Oh, and we said also specifically about peace security, increased insecurity for traditionally marginalized communities, like how that will then impacts too, and like can we ever be free of bias, data most. So that was the first question. And then the next one was, can AI help us eliminate nuclear weapons? Which is funny because we were so, like, we were really freaking out about this one, and then we seemed to get a bit more positive on this one, and like, we were like, oh, that thing that you mentioned. So the first thing for us was we said, it could actually weaken the deterrence, like, it can start to dismantle and challenge the very traditional mainstream ideas about how nuclear weapons make us safe, what the case is for keeping them. Given that, like, it's very much like denial, deterrence, like what the way that AI systems and how we develop them and stuff. Like, if it's decreasing the likelihood of using them, then it could be even more dangerous for us to use them to deterrent them. We did say that it could potentially limit and like diminish nuclear weapons as like strategic power that it is. And I think it comes to that kind of like building life cycle type thing we're talking about. We said that it could help us in terms, it could be a good and bad thing, but for example, AI can enhance risk reduction measures, it can help us verify and monitor the nuclear weapon systems, that kind of thing. Because even though that makes for like safer laws they exist, maybe we then states can be like, well, we've got them and they're there for deterrence, but we actually, like, AI help make it, cover our bases a bit better. We also, we were talking a little bit about, like, could it enhance existing like strategic systems for nuclear weapons and that kind of thing. And again, it correctly maybe if it's like it's framed in that way. And then we really like kind of just got over the debate and not much more like navigate how we felt about it, but we seem to feel a bit weirdly, even though like more of the negatives have been listed. I think one thing that came up for us was states change, and like as I was thinking about like how we were separating this, like the difference across 8 years of like Trump as the administration, their statements for what happens if we get Biden and not Biden again, that kind of thing. That has an impact, for example, across different states, circumstances, how they relate themselves to privacy, how they deal with international institutions and their relationships to them, like all of that. So it's more, they really could, and we kind of present, yes, AI could help us, but it's a really big like swing. If it doesn't help us, it can potentially make the use even more likely, and then we're even more like really not really good. So like I don't know how that makes anyone feel. Me, that's great. But yeah, that was basically it.
Who's your rapporteur? What's your name, sorry? Dan, could you stand in front of the camera so we can see?
Yeah, of course. My shoot's a bit of a disaster, so I mean it kind of goes two ways. It's upsetting. Yeah.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
How's that?
I mean, a lot of what was on the sheet was the first topic that we were going through. Several actors and thinking about how they could affect change in AI increase in security and how they could negate the negative effects of that. On both sides of this, we've listed various organizations and actors we think of interest is NATO. Policy and doctrine in military usage is really important. While they can't affect legislation, they can affect the direction that countries and member states might take. human rights organisations can do something, they can provide pressure, and they can campaign for, disabilities and protection of personal data. It's also up to industry and those that collect data, open source data platforms and web to decide whether they're going to go forward and either give AI companies access to this kind of data to exploit, or implement no development policies. DSCR, for example, government technology research and development agencies have the choice as to whether they're going to decide whether to commission technology from arms manufacturers, AI companies, etc. But finally, this was an interesting one. It's just the role of artists. I mean, this was mentioned earlier, that sci-fi and fiction and novels have an important role to play in kind of deciding what our view of this technology is and when we think it might go in the future, in 1,000 years' time, whether we'll have kind of battle droids or might still R2D2. It's really kind of the way we view it is perhaps indicative of where it's going to be shaped going forward. And on to the questions. I mean, this is kind of in here, but we got through 4 questions, so we kind of had a short debate about each of them. But on the first one, is AI good for society? I think there was a bit of debate there, but the kind of majority vote landed on probably not, especially right now, because it's kind of seen as a force multiplier, and the negative effects that we're seeing at the moment might be compounded going into the future if things as they are right now are untouched and not developed further. I mean, it's being deployed too early and we don't really understand it. And when you do that, it's hard to hold these things back. So we're seeing that the most likely outcome isn't necessarily good for society. And James raised the point that there are parts of society right now which are kind of structurally unequal, and AI doesn't solve those problems if you have people within the society building these systems, right? So it just enables you to make those mistakes and make those poor decisions quicker rather than solve them, per se. On AI helping conflict resolution, on the reverse, we actually unanimous, yes, it can help resolve conflicts. We all had kind of different perspectives on this thing. So, one example, the use of LLMs for dialogue. People can talk to each other, languages, different customs, whatever. AI might be able to overcome those easier than, say, a translator or a handshake skills. So, crisis response. What areas might be hit hardest by disaster or conflict or whatever. The more data we have, AI might be able to make those decisions better than a human can. It can process information faster, and if you're talking about conflict prevention, at the point where conflict has broken out, weapon systems could become more accurate to the point that mistakes are made less and less. Targeting can become more accurate, and there are less misunderstandings taking place. There was an interesting point raised about sensing technology and processing and analyzing that data through AI. So, for example, nuclear testing might be happening wherever else, and AI technologies might be able to sense that better, or missiles or moving arms, for example. And if countries and states believe that they don't have that kind of secrecy anymore due to the accuracy of the data that AI is collecting and processing, international pressure will go up and states will be less inclined to act that way.
I'm going to wrap up in a minute.
Of course, yeah. So taking out human elements sometimes might actually be a benefit. We kind of, I suppose, the last 2 questions aren't too peace and security related. So, can robots and AI make people happier, and will AI only affect elites? I'll talk about that.
You guys went through all the questions.
What's that?
You went through all the questions.
No, I haven't. I was just going to touch on the last one.
Oh yeah, no, I was just asking if your group went through each of them.
No, we did 4. The debate we were having on the question as to whether AI will only affect elites, we talked about accessibility and whether your everyday person have access to ChatGPT as they do now. But then we thought more about that and decided it's not necessarily about accessibility; it's about control. The everyday person can't control the outputs of the systems; they can only use them as they are as tools. So this might mean that that only a few people benefit from the systems, and we're unsure what their motivations are, what their security interests are. Yeah.
Thanks so much.